Born to be wild. I didn't even peek. I've got such good control of those pipes.
Good job, man.
Didn't even peek.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. My name is Arthur.
And my name is Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we watch and discuss a classic film from every year. This week we're in 1969, taking a look at Easy Rider from director Dennis Hopper and also starring Dennis Hopper, alongside Peter Fonda and Jack Nicholson. For any new listeners, you can find where our movies are streaming or available to rent online in the link in our show notes. I myself watched this one on HBO Max. And if anyone is listening from HBO Max, get your shit together. Your app is falling apart and it's got the best content online.
What happened?
You cannot pause, you cannot rewind, you cannot go forward. You can barely type in the name of a film that you're trying to search for. The user experience on HBO Max is dreadful. But again, it has some of the best content online, so I am always using it.
I mean, I didn't have to pause it or rewind it. You know, for me, I start a movie and then I watch it, so I didn't have any issues.
Well, I had to go to the bathroom, I guess.
I pause all bodily functions. I have a switch on the back of my neck that I can click. And it I don't even have to breathe when I do that thing.
All right, should we talk about what's going on in 69?
Yeah, you should
give us a little context for the year.
We went to the moon, right? Allegedly.
Oh, God. Quickly become that kind of podcast.
Oh, immediately.
Yeah, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin become the first people to walk on the moon with the Apollo 11 NASA moon mission. Andrew, have you ever read the speech Nixon was planned to give if they didn't make it back?
No.
Oh, really eerie and strange. You should read that, actually.
Are you going to put it in the show notes?
I can put it in the show notes. Yeah, it's like from a weird alternate history, if you think about it.
Do you think that when Nixon said that they didn't have to do a speech or that he had to cancel something, do you think he would say, oh, we got to nix that on?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You've just been nixed.
Didn't he have a nickname like Slippery Dick or something like that?
Tricky Dick.
Tricky Dick. Also, in the science and technology space, the first communications are sent through the ARPANET, which was the predecessor to the internet. 1969 is also known for some big music events. You've got Woodstock, which I've heard about, and the Beatles, their last public performance on top of the Apple Records roof. They also released their last album that they recorded together, Abbey Road. In LA, you've got the Charles Manson murders, which I was reminded of in our film today, the little hippie colony. Also this year, I see Stonewall Riot, and PBS is formed. The first Sesame Street is aired. I swear I had more for this year, but I don't think my documents saved properly.
Oops.
Well, sorry, listeners. You're getting the short end of the stick. Or if you don't like that part of the podcast, we can move to the stuff you actually care about. What's going on in the movies, Andrew?
Man, we got some bangers. Boom. I should have pulled this up. Now I'm about to be just as scrambled as I always am at this part. Okay. So have you ever seen The Color of Pomegranates?
I've seen pomegranates, and I've seen that they are a certain color.
Wow. So it's a film, obviously, is what I'm trying to get at here. If I didn't want to do the episode on Easy Rider, like if I had had any sort of argument against this being our film for the year, that would have easily been the one I said we cover. It's an incredibly beautiful film. You should watch it. It's a beautiful aesthetic piece of poetry. It's super short, too. It's barely an hour and a half. I don't even know if it's a full hour and a half. Sergei Parajanov, and it's a Soviet film. Beautiful, beautiful movie, unlike anything you've ever watched. The Best Picture winner this year is Midnight Cowboy, which is a very weird movie.
I want to see it, actually.
Yes,
I'm curious.
It's got so much queer content. It's got a very strange plot, and even just the way it looks, it's a very experimental and strange film. It feels like the movie that would win Best Picture in the same year that Easy Rider was released. Of course, we have the classic Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which in a turnabout way is the reason why we have the Sundance Film Festival. You got the Wild Bunch going on. But you know what? I don't want to talk about these movies that everyone's seen. I want to talk about Funeral Parade of the Roses. You ever heard of Funeral Parade of the Roses?
No.
It is this insane acid trip Japanese film that's about these trans female prostitutes, and it's also a story of Oedipus. I love that movie so much. It's wild. Its politics do not hold up to modern scrutiny, but it is just an insane movie to even exist from its time, and I think it deserves to be respected. I really love that movie. One of my all-time favorite films from Jean-Pierre Melville, Army of Shadows, comes out this year, which is his reflection upon World War II. We have Costa Gavras releasing Z, which is a really great political thriller. I love that movie. I do not officially recommend Putney Swope because it might be the most racist film ever made. But again, it's so crazy radical, and it is just absolute batshit. It's a great movie. I'll say that, even though it has so many questionable elements. Fellini's Satyricon. Man, these aren't just great movies. These are some of the wildest, most out there movies I like recommending to people. And also, they're all queer. These are all queer. Fellini's Satyricon is him taking the objectification of women that's present in all of his films and making the entire movie homosexual. It's these two men going through the layers of hell, and they are fighting over this young boy that they both want to have sex with. True Grit, which we discussed during one of our episodes at some point.
Yeah, at some point.
They all blur together. That comes out this year. Medium Cool, The Passion of Anna, The Cremator. Man, there are so many. Kess, Salesman. Oh, Louis Buñuel's The Milky Way. Women in Love. There are so many great films from 1969. I'm starting to think that the 1960s are one of my favorite decades in cinema, because every time we do this part, I keep seeing that so many films that I love. Double Suicide, Medea, which is this insane adaptation of the Medea myth from Pasolini. Okay, anyways. So at some point, movies, I'm just saying titles.
There's like nothing here that I've even seen. This is a weird period in film history where it feels like, I don't know, it's like there's a dark age between the big blockbusters of the 50s and early 60s, and then the blockbuster as we traditionally know it, like that becomes popular in the 70s with Jaws and Star Wars, where I'm just kind of out of my element. Okay, so I have seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the most unique James Bond film from this era, in my opinion, with new James Bond George Lazenby. I recommend that. I like that. It's got a dark ending.
Cool. But yes, the major Hollywood musical gets a nail in its coffin this year with Hello, Dolly, which, a hot take, I don't even think is all that great of a musical. It's a good musical if you have a really great Dolly, because that's the only thing in the musical. There is a plot going on in the background, but she honestly doesn't even play that big of a role in the central narrative. So I don't think it's a great show, but if you're watching a really great performer do it, it's amazing. And Barbra Streisand is an incredible and great performer. The problem is that the medium of the film, as opposed to the medium of the stage, makes it to where you are searching for a narrative, you are searching for something deeper within a movie, and it can't really deliver in a spectacle from a performance in the same way a stage show can. So it fails spectacularly, and Hollywood is terrified of making musicals for a long time.
That's too bad. There were some really great musicals in the 60s.
Yep.
Well, should we get to our little film?
So, Easy Rider tells the tale of two ill-fated motorcyclists, Wyatt and Billy, played by Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper respectively, as they journey from LA to New Orleans. They've recently made quite a bit of cash from a drug deal and want to live freely in America. They are pursuing true freedom, and in that pursuit, they encounter a commune, rednecks, hippies, and an eccentric townie named George, played by Jack Nicholson. After they attract the attention of some locals with their free spirits and lackadaisical life approach, they are attacked in their sleep. Wyatt is injured, Billy is unscathed, but George is dead. They take the rest of George's money and spend it on a nice meal and prostitutes. They do LSD with the prostitutes and have a bad trip in a cemetery. Now that it feels like the American dream has abandoned our heroes, they decide to retreat to Florida. However, on their way, two rednecks in a truck shoot them out of insecurity and fear, and the film ends as Wyatt's iconic motorcycle burns away and the camera flies into the heavens. So really, really short plot description, because this movie isn't driven by a plot for the most part. It's driven by a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's driven by a motorcycle. What's it actually? What is it driven by? It's driven by pretty scenery,
counterculturalism,
good music,
great music.
Yeah. It's an emotional piece. It's a mood piece.
Yes, a frustration against the social culture of the 60s and the people who were bubbling underneath it and weren't getting noticed, and now they get to be in a movie.
Is this a quintessential hippie film?
I would say so. What did you think?
Well, I really liked it. Yeah, I really
wonderful.
liked it.
That's good to hear. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how you were going to feel about this film, and that's not meant as a criticism or anything.
That's fair.
I wasn't sure. This is a tough sell. I like a lot of films from this era and from the BBS production studio. We'll talk about them later. But this is one of the tougher ones, I think, to sell people on, just because there isn't anything going on, really. But I like the fact that it's a mood piece.
Yeah, it felt pretty chill, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I knew kind of what I was getting into when we started. I knew that this was going to be quite a departure from a standard Hollywood film. But, you know, we have plenty of those on our list. This isn't too out there. It's not. I wouldn't describe this as avant-garde. Would you? Maybe there's elements that push up against...
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's completely out of the realm of avant-garde.
The LSD scene at the end is... And some of the transitions...
I would say this film shares more elements with avant-garde and experimental cinema than it does traditional Hollywood cinema.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think because I'm so used to road trip films, it feels like there's a lot of familiar elements. But I don't think road trip films were super popular at the time when this was made.
I mean, this one was super popular at the time when it was made.
It wasn't a genre yet.
I don't know enough, honestly, to say that. I want to say that because we haven't discussed any road movies in our popular movies that we've talked about before the episodes, but, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, there's probably some out there that I just don't know about.
And they were all major successes, and we didn't even talk about them.
What are some of your thoughts on the film before we get to our review, which I think does kind of touch on the idea of the road trip genre?
So I do think it's a really great movie. I think that there is a lot of frustration underneath the surface of this movie, and the fact that the script was so freeform, and the fact that so much of the film was improv, and that everybody involved in the production of it was sort of going at it from this "we're going to make a movie like nobody ever has" angle, that it's able to express emotions and personality in a way that a lot of films, even independent films and even experimental films, don't really get to do. So I really like how the emotions and the turbulence within is portrayed, and also appreciate how successfully it is portrayed.
Damn. Yeah, that's a good summary. That's a good way to put it. Should we talk about what we think about Roger Ebert and what he thinks about this movie?
Yes, I'm down.
For this section of the podcast, we always look at a review from the time period, but we've never had a critic who I think is so contemporary. I mean, Roger Ebert started out, I think, in 1967?
Yes, at the Chicago Sun-Times, and he was there till 2013.
So yeah, we're just, it feels strange to get into like the modern era. But I guess we're there. We're 50 years away, aren't we? So, yeah, what do you think of Roger Ebert as a critic, at least in this early review from him?
Yes, that's a loaded question for me. But within this review, I think this is a wonderful review. And just to clarify on that, I think Roger Ebert is a wonderful critic in general. There are moments later in his career, but we'll have time to get to that. We actually really will have time to get to that. Yeah, this is a wonderful review. He really seems to understand this film. He's calling out the people who are doubting the film's success and trying to belittle the film and belittle the college and high school audiences that are going to enjoy it. I like this aspect of criticism that I feel we have not touched on in other reviews. Other reviews have not touched on the subject itself. And I like that. I mean, he says right here, Hollywood has to believe in magic. Everybody knows that Easy Rider is tremendously popular with high school and college-age kids, but these kids apparently sprang into existence full-blown and did not grow up or go to any other movie before they found this one. That's his ironic interpretation of their perspective, which is interesting. The same sort of vibe was there for Rebel Without a Cause when that movie came out, and there was a huge rush of high school and college-age kids who liked it quite a bit. And there were these adults who said, they just don't even understand movies. It's like, no, they've seen other movies as well. They just really like this one.
Yeah, just looking over at Vincent Canby at the New York Times, he dismisses this film and is very sniffy towards it. So
can we circle back to our unintentional humor across episodes, where in our Playtime episode, we mentioned that Vincent Canby seemed to have a really good opinion and we liked his review. And I said something along the lines of, we like him now, but, who knows? I might hate him as soon as he hates something I like. And then is it the next episode that we recorded that we were just trashed him? And when we were trashing him, when we were recording that next episode, we had forgotten that we said that. And then when we listened to the Playtime episode back, we were laughing so hard because we were like, the prophecy came true. Just the next week we were like, no, screw Vincent Canby. Get him out of here.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll hate Roger Ebert here in a second as well.
When the appropriate moment comes, I will give my fully worded Roger Ebert rant. But that is not this episode, nor is it the next episode. I don't know when it will happen, but when the moment comes, it will come.
I liked this review because it gave me exactly what I want from reviews and why we look at them for this show is a little bit of context for the time. He talks a lot about how the motorcycle film as a genre has existed before this movie and that it was to be expected that there would be one that came along that really gave the genre a masterpiece that really gave it credit. I think that genre he's talking about became like the road trip movies, which so many independent films today adopt as a skeleton and a structural template to hang their ideas. Because I feel like you see it all over the place, especially in films at Sundance and in the film festival circuits.
Agreed. If you follow the story closely in Easy Rider, you find out it isn't there. The rough cut of the movie reportedly ran over 3 hours, and Hopper edited it to a reasonable length by throwing out the story details and keeping the rest. So the heroes are suspended in an invisible story, like falcons on an invisible current of air. You can't see it, but it holds them up. I like that paragraph for 2 reasons. One, I think it's very well written and a very good summarization of this film's mood. And secondly, because it really sets this review itself in its time period before all of the details of the editing of this film would be released to the public. Mm-hmm. Because he would not be saying Hopper was the one editing it down if he'd known what we know today. Again, more to come after this brief message. No, I'm just kidding. Somebody sponsor us. We need money.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the editing process. Do we want to jump into that?
The editing process has to come later. We gotta. What are my talking points here? I wrote these. Jesus.
The beginning of New Hollywood.
Okay, so this film was produced by Ebert Productions. However, they're more commonly referred to as BBS Productions, which is what they became after this film became a success. the BBS stands for Bob Rafelson, Bert Schneider, and Stephen Blauner. Bob Rafelson notoriously had this Hollywood exec desk that had a pull-out drawer that was just cocaine.
Oh.
And you would just go into his office and you, like before every meeting, he would do a line and you would do a line. And that was how every meeting started.
That's how movies got made.
Exactly. I really like the level of transparency we have on the Criterion supplements for these movies. There's a really great box set called BBS Lost and Found in America or something along those lines. It's one of their best box set releases ever, and it tells you the entire story of the BBS production company while including every film that they produced. It's fantastic stuff, but all of the interviews with everybody, because everyone's recording these interviews 30, 40 years afterwards, and they're in these comfortable situations where they know the whole point of this thing is to document the history. There's just no detail spared. Everything is on the table, kind of like Bob Rafelson's cocaine. And they just, I don't know, there's just no holding back. I mean, Dennis Hopper's commentary track alone is so unhinged. So if you're interested in Easy Rider and the films from this production company, I recommend taking the dive because you learn a lot of stuff. Anyways, before this, Roger Corman was a famous producer who was sort of doing what we would consider kind of independent filmmaking. And Jack Nicholson actually wrote a script for a film that he produced called The Trip. And when The Trip was made, it featured Peter Fonda, Bruce Dern, and Dennis Hopper. And it was sort of this movie that's just about an acid trip. It's a very silly movie. When that was made, they sort of formed a friendship, and that was when Dennis Hopper first had the idea of making a film that was just about these two guys riding a motorcycle across the country, and there was nothing else to do. And so they approached Roger Corman and said, hey, you're producing these smaller budgeted films and kind of letting people do their own thing. We want to do that with this. And he was very interested in the project. But upon meeting Dennis Hopper and hearing the way he spoke and his very aggressive nature, Roger Corman said he would not work with him. Introduce Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, who were just as aggressive and ridiculous as Dennis Hopper was, if interviews are to be believed. And they met them, and they all did a bunch of drugs together, and they said, yeah, go make that stupid movie about the motorcycles. And that was sort of how Easy Rider got on the road. There was a lot of contention over the screenplay at first, because Dennis Hopper wanted to make a film, quote-unquote, akin to Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which had released 2 weeks before this movie went into production, before Easy Rider went into production, which is hilarious that he saw that movie and then 2 weeks later was on the set and said, okay, everyone, we're making that.
But with motorcycles.
That's sort of the level of how Dennis Hopper was handling this whole thing. Terry Southern's screenplay originally was pretty much just poetry and describing landscapes. The whole thing was supposed to be a very sparse movie and there wasn't much dialogue written. What Terry Southern hated was that Dennis Hopper did so much improv, and then because of the improv demanded that he be credited for writing the screenplay, even though the screenplay itself left room for improv. So Terry sort of saw that as his idea. And then because Dennis Hopper got a cut on the writer's check, Peter Fonda said, well, I want one too. I improv most of my lines too. And then that was how Terry Southern sort of got shoved in the background as the writer for this film, even though he put so much effort and time into it. Dennis Hopper is a very strange bird. There is, at this point in his career, he was essentially pariah in Hollywood. He was known for having these crazy freakouts on set. He was known for telling directors what to do on set. He just had so many things going against him at this point, and then he starts to make this film, and he's put in charge of a movie, and it comes out and it's a huge success, but it is this tumultuous thing where everyone who worked on it was annoyed with him and he was grating on everybody and people didn't want to work with him or couldn't see his vision, and it didn't seem like he had much of a vision to communicate in the first place. So kind of a frustrating film to make.
Didn't he almost get in a fight with an actor they were courting, like in pre-production?
Yes.
Where he pulled a knife on him?
So that actor was Rip Torn, sort of a famous American actor. I mean, I would call him a very famous American actor. And he was originally going to be playing George, the role that Jack Nicholson took.
That's right.
And they were talking to him in a diner, and Dennis Hopper started going off on all of these rants about rednecks and how much he hated the politics of the South. And Rip Torn was from Texas and told him to back down. And Dennis Hopper pulled a knife on him and threatened him. And so Rip Torn slammed the table, ran out of the cafe, and said he would not be on the film, which I think he had the right to do.
That's fair at that point, yeah.
And then I think it was 20 years later, in an interview on a late night show, Dennis Hopper says that Rip Torn pulled a knife on him in the cafe. So this is the guy we're dealing with.
You can still have huge egos on these little independent films. In fact, they can probably get away with more crap like this.
And you know, he was in Rebel Without a Cause, as well as Giant, another James Dean film, and that was how he got his claim to fame. But he was so obsessed with method acting and so devoted to method acting that people found him infuriating to work with. And so this entire movie is him sort of attempting to project his ideas of what acting and filmmaking should be, of this method system of making a movie and making something that feels 100% genuine and authentic because it is. He's trying to put all of that into effect. And that comes from the horse's mouth. That's how he sort of described making this movie. So it's insane, honestly. It's insane to think that you're just knowing that you're going to be on a motorcycle doing actual drugs, actually driving from Los Angeles to New Orleans, and you've got a film crew with you, and that's just what's happening for the next few months.
I mean, it looks authentic.
Yes.
So you can give him credit for that.
Oh, I give him credit for everything in this movie. You know, I might not agree with method acting as an actor myself, and I might have issues with the way he treats people on set, but the art is good, and the movie is good, and what he wanted to achieve is achieved. And I think that's honorable, regardless of other issues.
Do you think that there are still ways to make great art without, abusing your crew and your collaborators? Well, and not just great art, but art that looks like this.
I mean, this movie exists because he's a maniac. This movie was never going to be made without him acting like that and doing all of that stuff.
Would now be a good time to talk about the editing process and kind of how he and the editor whittled it down? Right.
So he was really determined on this whole 2001 thing and decided, you know what 2001 didn't do? Be 4 hours long. So he made a 4-hour long cut of the movie and was trying to describe it as definitive. And the studio saw it and said, cut it now. Cut it now. It has to be 2 hours. And so he cut it to 2.5 hours. He cut it to the exact minute length of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
He was a fan.
I mean, I get it. I am a huge fan.
I get it. Yeah.
Anyone who wants to find that out can listen to our previous week's episode. But this is insanity. And at that point, the studio ripped it from him and said, sorry, boo. Bert Schneider, he was the second B in BBS. He took the film and made it an hour and a half. And I truly think it's all the better for it. Allegedly, there were a bunch of huge story chunks, and there was this gigantic narrative that was attempting to be portrayed. And
I read some of the descriptions of the deleted scenes. They kind of sound ridiculous.
Yes.
Honestly, like a lot of money was left on the cutting room floor.
Yes.
That's a kind of a bold decision to then just focus on the chill mood pieces in the film. and leave those action set pieces.
At the end, they went back to the script. They went back to the Terry Southern script when they were editing it. And it served as a huge anchor for where the film should go. And I think the movie is way better for it. And that is a rare thing for me to agree with, studio interference on the final cut of a film. But as somebody who is a fan of this movie, the one thing it doesn't need is to be any longer. I like the movie, but even as it exists, there are full sections of it where you can sort of find yourself getting distracted. And this movie is also meant to be sort of more of a social event. When people were going and seeing it, they were getting high and going to the movie theater and talking with their friends, or they were at the drive-in and having sex. You know, that was the vibe of this movie. So there is this social element to it. When you're watching it by yourself in your house, that really doesn't get to be communicated. And I think the film is still great without that aspect. But it does bring into question how much of the success of it from a financial standpoint with these high schoolers and college kids was them going to see Easy Rider because that was a place where they could be accepted and that was the cool movie and it was a movie you could talk during.
Yeah. And I've heard that about a lot of films that were meant to be seen in drive-ins, that there are long sections of them that are purposefully kind of boring and dull, where you're literally supposed to kind of lose your attention and go talk to people or do other things, make out with someone, and then you get pulled back in when the monster shows back up or the horror parts kick in. For whatever editing that happened, I am glad that they kept in what seems like a large chunk of Jack Nicholson's scenes. I feel like him and his character, what he embodies, and Roger Ebert points this out in the review, it's an important part of like putting us into the film. Yeah, I just like him.
Is it Roger Ebert who says, and then the movie makes sense?
Yeah.
There's a really great introduction to Easy Rider from Quentin Tarantino on YouTube. And he talks about how the film doesn't have the plot until the end of the movie. And then all of a sudden it does have a plot just because of the way it ends. And he talks about how Jack Nicholson being this outsider who gets to be in there with them is, you know, finally the audience is allowed to be in the movie. And then very quickly after that is when actual events start happening in the movie. Yeah, it's a fantastic performance from Jack Nicholson.
But this, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know he was in this film.
Oh, lucky. Yeah, he was really heavily involved in this early American independent cinema movement. As I said, he wrote those scripts. He was in the very first BBS Productions movie was Head, which came out 1968 and is a monkeys movie that's trying to sort of capitalize on Beatlemania, but with the monkeys instead of the Beatles. It is a wild ride of a movie. I like it. I don't love it, but there are certain sequences of it that are so insane from a visual standpoint. In that film, there's a really funny sequence where the whole movie breaks down and the cameras come down and you see all of these crew members come out from behind it. And it's just a really funny fourth wall break that you don't see coming. And in the middle of it, the script advisor comes up and is like pointing to the script and circling this thing saying, "We missed this." And it's Jack Nicholson. And it's a 5-second role. So he was really heavily involved in this era of cinema. But this was a really big breakthrough for him. He got nominated for an Oscar for this. And then the next BBS Productions film after this, 5 Easy Pieces, which is a fantastic movie, that's really the one that put him on the map. It's him going on this road trip and being completely disillusioned with America in general. And it's him and Karen Black. She's one of the prostitutes in Easy Rider. I'm a huge Karen Black fan as well. I love so many people that are involved in Easy Rider that it's easy for me to watch, you know? It's easy for me to ride along with it. But yes, 5 Easy Pieces, fantastic film as well. So I like that this movie, even though it isn't the introduction of Jack Nicholson in the grand scope of things, it is sort of him burgeoning into the public, getting nominated for an Oscar. His Oscar nomination is honestly one of the things that really gave this movie a prestigious level.
Yeah.
just the fact that it got an Oscar nomination for that and for the screenplay, that sort of cemented this film's legacy in a strange way, because it was seen as just a high school kid movie that was against the norm and didn't have anything to say. And then the Academy said, you know what, we're going to honor this thing. Back when the Academy stood for something.
I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say on Jack Nicholson in his... I think he gets all the best lines in the film.
Yes, his rant about the Venusians and these peaceful aliens who have been in communication with our government officials, and all of these people know, and they're keeping it a secret because society could collapse. We just been saying the same shit for decades, dude. I loved it. Listening to that rant, I said, there was just a Curse Gaze got YouTube video from, I think, a year or two ago, was about how if aliens were to visit, society would collapse. And they might have a point, but it was just so fascinating to hear somebody from the 60s saying the same thing.
I think a lot of his dialogue can just be transplanted right into our day and age. His rant about what it means to truly be free, I loved that. It was interesting, too, to see or hear someone going on and on about government conspiracies while the moon landing is going to happen. This film was filmed in 1968, so just next year. But I feel like government conspiracies and everything kind of being a cover-up becomes like a really popular trope and eventually cliche in the 1970s. So you feel that coming about, too.
Oh, yeah. We got to talk about Peter Fonda.
Oh, let's talk about Peter Fonda. Yeah, I thought it was great.
He's so good in this. Let me pull up my notes. This is so fascinating to me. So we got to discuss Henry Fonda last week a little bit.
Right, his father.
And Henry Fonda was befuddled by this film, and especially befuddled by the success of this film, and said something along the lines of, my son is about to make more money than I ever had for one picture, and it's a picture that I don't even understand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he had a lot of pressure from his father to be in this industry and to be a good actor, and he's described their relationship as abusive. And he also had almost killed himself when he was a child. I think he was 10 years old. He accidentally shot himself in the stomach.
Oh, geez.
And he was taken to the hospital, and he just barely survived. Not to mention, he had this huge sympathy for left-wing American politics, while his father was very much right-wing. Funny to think that his father was right-wing and voted Democrat, Roosevelt. There you go. You know, things just switch and change all the time. It just, things feel so extreme now. But also, you know, like I said, you watch a movie like this and you realize, oh, people have been saying the same shit since the 60s. So people were probably saying that same shit then too. And that's just how it goes. I think that a lot of that is portrayed in his performance in this movie. I think that Peter Fonda, he has this sort of silent, I almost want to say anti-hero vibe to him. He has this energy that feels like it is protesting against something unknown and unstated. You know, Dennis Hopper says so many times what he's protesting against. Even Jack Nicholson gets to go on a rant about what freedom really is. But Peter Fonda, for the most part, remains silent and sort of will agree or will occasionally have something to contribute, but doesn't really get that big cathartic moment himself until, of course, the acid trip, when he is envisioning the stone angel as his mother and having a complete meltdown. Dennis Hopper told him while they were on acid to pretend that the stone angel was his mother. And then while he was doing it, the acid really kicked in and he had that meltdown.
Ugh.
Can you imagine having a meltdown on any sort of drug, or even just having just a regular meltdown and there's just a camera crew?
It's a weird part of, I mean, that's got to almost feel normalized for Peter Fonda, who grew up in Hollywood. I wonder how weird that actually is for him.
That's an interesting point.
Because I bet his entire life is kind of a public spectacle.
It's funny because I guess in the 4-hour cut of the movie, throughout the entire film, they were flashing forward to events happening later, and it was this really on the nose, this is foreshadowing this, but you're only going to see a split second of it, and then we're going to keep going like that didn't happen. But the one that makes it through when he looks on the plaque in the diner that says a quote about death, and then he has that split second vision of the motorcycle burning from the end of the movie, it's so good.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, he just looks at it, sees a motorcycle. I think he just says, whoa. It's something like that. That's all he says.
Yeah. I guess that's why I come back to the idea that I don't know if Dennis Hopper and his antics and violence and just entire shtick was necessary, because I feel like this film is really good because of contributions from a lot of other people, and especially the editor in the end. I don't know. But was he just hampering something that could have been even better?
But it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't even exist. That's what I'm saying. That hypothetical is impossible for me because, yeah, sure, was that necessary to make that art or whatever? That's an eternal debate. But when the art is good, the art is good. And, I would agree many other people's contributions are responsible for this film being great. This film could easily be seen as something that's some sort of auteur theory argument because it feels so Hopper-esque and what he was going for. But then when you look into the nitty-gritty details, just like every other film, there were so many people involved, and the final product was made in spite of him. Specifically, the edit of the movie was made in spite of him. So, yeah, I don't know. But I just know the movie wouldn't exist. And I hate debating whether stuff is necessary or not. Because, if he's a bad person, he's a bad person. Still enjoyed the movie. But I know people hate that.
Yeah, it was Francis Ford Coppola who said that directing is like one of the last dictatorial roles in society that is just accepted. I don't know if that's true that it's the last.
Yeah,
but it's accepted.
That was me what I said too. I was like, wait.
Okay, now we should talk about other things in this film. The soundtrack. The first time we really had a film that has a lot of really contemporary, for the time, of course, music that's being used.
Completely changed the way people approach soundtracks and scores for the rest of time.
I believe it. And I loved it. I really loved that aspect of the movie.
It's a fantastic soundtrack.
It just felt so different from any of the other films we've had on our list in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know.
In a lot of regards, but especially the music.
I got crazy deja vu just now to the point that I felt I had to look back.
That's fair. We're probably wrong.
Yeah, people were going to be like, what about that episode where... Yeah, I really love the soundtrack in this film. Bangers across the board.
And from what I read, a huge portion of the budget went to obtaining the music rights.
$1 million, allegedly.
But I think that just goes to show, they knew what was important. They put the money into what was important. And, music during this era is a huge draw. Keep
in mind that the full-length soundtrack of all of the licensed music that was gotten is longer than the movie itself is, and that a lot of the music was licensed for the 2.5-hour cut, this 2001 cut, and then wasn't even used. So there's a lot of wasted money in there too.
Oh, okay. All right.
You listen to the soundtrack and you think, oh wow, they really got all the hits, and then you watch the movie and you think, again, there's so many hits, but you start wondering, wait, I thought this song was in there somewhere. It's on the soundtrack. Born to be Wild. That's such an amazing song.
Iconic.
Steppenwolf.
It reminds me of some behind the scenes trivia I remember from Mad Men, in that they spent a lot of money licensing songs that only play over the end credits. Like they play for a moment at the very end of each episode, but then they mainly play over the end credits. Mm-hmm. But it's still such an important part of, and it's expensive to do that, but it's still such an important part of putting that show into its time period. And it really makes you believe that it's in the 1960s, way more than if they had just kind of done things that sound a little similar. It's just important. All right, what else should we talk about? Tell me about what it's like to take drugs, because I've never taken drugs.
You know what? We're gonna flash back to our what episode was it? It was in the 30s, I think, when we had the discussion on whoever's dad texted in that they'd be a good president first would win.
Yes.
My dad has still never texted in. It has been confirmed. My parents aren't listening to this. So I'm going to say this right here, right now for mom and dad. I love you so much, but I'm putting this disclaimer here. I'm making these statements with the faith that you are never going to listen to this. And if you are listening to this, you're privy to something that I didn't expect you to listen to. All right, now that that's out of the way, I like that this film is so upfront about drug use and drug culture, and it doesn't feel puritanical or judgmental. It's just sort of a part of life. The only time it even really gets discussed is with Jack Nicholson, in which case he's comparing it to his alcoholism, and they're very clear with him, marijuana is not like alcohol. You aren't going to get hooked on it the way you do alcohol, which is true. There are studies now that marijuana is addictive, and I do know people who can't make it through a day without smoking, so, but it's still nowhere near as bad for you as alcoholism is. And so I like this film because it depicts drugs as this liberator for them. And they are kind of delusional with their whole, oh yeah, we're not even going to use this money. We're not going to sell out. We're going to do our own thing and be completely free, actually free, and not have to be capitalists. But they are in America, and then they do spend the money on the prostitutes and a really nice meal. And then they do the acid. And when they do the acid, their brains unlock to that level, and they're made aware of the fact that they have done the thing that they thought they weren't going to do. And that's really when the American dream becomes disillusioned for them. It's not because of what's happening around them. It's because they are suddenly aware that what's happening around them is already inside of them and a part of who they are.
And there's really no way to escape that for them.
Right. Once they're burdened with the gift of knowledge, there's no giving it back. My final thoughts on the drug culture of this movie is watching it feels like such a time capsule. And you sort of, for me anyways, I sort of yearn for when the 60s and the 70s, when drugs were way more accepted and the war on drugs hadn't really kicked in yet. And there wasn't such a cultural resistance against it. I mean, there was a religious resistance against it, but not this societal thing that we have now. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine a world like that. And this film also depicts them going through a part of the country where they are still completely unaccepted. And I imagine drugs are a big part of that. I thought what you said about their trip and how it kind of makes them reevaluate their place in an American capitalist society was a really good sort of wrap up of the themes in this film. But is there anything else that you want to say? Any final thoughts?
No, man. It's a chill movie. I almost don't want to ruin it by dissecting it too far.
Well, cool. Then I think that we don't need to do that.
Cool.
And, you've listened to us describe it. If it sounds like it's something up your alley, check it out. Definitely feels like a film to watch for 1969.
I would agree. And if I had to make a recommendation off that BBS box set, Last Picture Show, that movie rocks. That is an incredible movie.
I was going to say what was really weird is that 10 years ago, we were wrapping up the 50s with Ben-Hur, the biggest movie of all time ever. And then we are wrapping up the 60s with a small independent road movie without a plot. Easy Rider.
But you know what's interesting? Biggest movie ever, and it was huge, Ben-Hur. I think, let me double check this. I think Easy Rider is still one of the most profitable films ever made because of how cheap it was and how much money it made.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this Century in Cinema project and the story that we have kind of constructed, that it just going from Ben-Hur to Easy Rider in 10 years. I know we're constructing the story and we are choosing the films that we're watching, but seriously, I think that demonstrates how different the movie industry is and how radically it has changed in these 10 years pretty well. you go from something huge to something pretty small. And I think that's to do with a lot of things. What do you think is really, like, what are the big changes in the film industry that you saw?
I mean, movies broke this decade, you know?
Yeah.
Persona, right. Blow Up, The Birds, all of these films of the directors really starting to analyze what is film as a medium and questioning it and putting those questions directly into the film in a way that the audiences were forced to confront that themselves. And then, you know, we come to Easy Rider, where the whole thing feels like an entire send-up of what you would even do to make a movie, how you would even make a movie. And you have Playtime, like, breaking the conventions of what a comedy is supposed to be. You have Once Upon a Time in the West completely deconstructing the Western and then rebuilding it into a great Western. 8.5, of course, such a meta film. You know, I mean, that was really a major theme for me in this decade.
I love that. I can't help but point out, too, that we had a lot of musicals. West Side Story, Mary Poppins, Sound of Music. And in each of those episodes, we keep talking about how the musical genre is slowly dying. And I think it's mirroring the death of Hollywood and the big grand scope that Hollywood had before all of this.
I said this during the Sound of Music episode, but I like that West Side Story is an honest depiction of a stage show in a way that it's trying to bring it to a wider audience. Mary Poppins is a fully original movie musical showing the difference in how you would approach a movie musical versus a stage musical. And then The Sound of Music is a movie whose entire purpose is to completely improve upon the stage show and make it into a better product. You don't really see that sort of example ever, really, not with Sound of Music.
But of course, we have to mention, too, that the Hays Code slowly dies throughout the decade. And that's got to have something to do with the kind of films that were the same. I mean, we just start to see more mature films, really.
Oh, yeah. The Manchurian Candidate, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Bonnie and Clyde and these incredibly violent films that follow. But, it's a case of you see these things break down, and sometimes it's hard to pinpoint cause and effect. Do you think that the Hays Code just goes away because it becomes necessary to compete with television? Because every household in America now has got to have a TV. People are watching TV across the world, and they're just going to theaters less to get their entertainment.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
And we see it today in exactly what everyone's talking about: streaming and social media and content creation. Films are competing with a lot of stuff, a lot of new forms of entertainment today. And that's kind of the same identity crisis that cinema is facing in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but think that cinema is going to break in some similar way today.
I feel like Annette is a step forward.
I mean, I thought it was gorgeous and really, I loved it.
And even the way it just refused to be a 3-act movie structure, the whole movie, it was pretty much saying, okay, it's a musical, so it's a 2-act musical structure in the way a stage show would be. I thought that was brilliant. Anyways, what was your favorite film from the 60s?
As you say, this decade's full of bangers, man. It's hard to pinpoint.
I do love saying that.
One that I just really think stands above the rest. I love a lot of them for a lot of different reasons. It's hard. That's a hard question.
This was interesting because this has been the first decade where not a single film was one that I was watching for the first time.
That's true. Yeah.
And on top of that, I owned them all. So this was a really nice.
I love all these. Yeah.
I love all of these movies. And as I've said in previous episodes when we recap, I really love contextualizing these movies next to each other and building this timeline with them, because for me 8.5 and Persona were the 60s, but to know that 8.5 came out 2 years before Persona and that Bergman would have seen it, I don't know, there was something really interesting about that. God, I love Playtime. I like as far as these movies really are very unique from each other. Even Mary Poppins and Sound of Music are very different films from each other, even though they share so many elements. But when I'm thinking of just the most unique film experience, it has to be either Easy Rider or Playtime. And for me personally, Playtime is the better film. So I would probably say that's my favorite film from this lineup. But I'm with you. It's a very, very tough choice.
I think exactly what you said, giving these films context, watching The Manchurian Candidate and kind of knowing the time period that it exists in is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Persona. There's that incredible scene of the monk, his self-immolation, and just kind of knowing the context of the Vietnam War, where it was at that time, really gives that scene a lot more impact.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing, of course, for Easy Rider, right? Like coming at the very end of the 60s, when everything kind of feels like it's fallen apart and that sense of revolution is dead. That film has a lot more tragedy to it than if you just watched it and you're like, oh, a fun little hippie movie. Like knowing where it comes from gives it a lot of weight. You know, I'm going to choose West Side Story as my favorite film. I've been watching a ton of musicals, even just in my free time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because that film won me over and reminded me why I love the genre so much. My least favorite film, and I, by the way, and I think Playtime is an excellent choice. I think more people should watch films like Playtime and get into that mood.
But it's your least favorite film from the decade?
Oh, no.
Oh,
no.
I wasn't sure where that was going.
Where was I going?
You said my least favorite film, and
there was a period.
Like, and then
there was a period. I do think Playtime is maybe the hardest film to get into. There's sort of a hurdle there. But once you get past it, the film is exceptional. What's your least favorite film from this decade?
So what was your least favorite film from the decade? You never finished that thought. You said my least favorite film of the decade and then went into a Playtime rant. I'm the one that does that. That's my job on the podcast.
Okay. Okay, if I'm being honest, I think my least favorite film, and these are all exceptional films. I keep having to remind viewers and you, Andrew, that.
Yeah.
I think 8.5 was the one I had the least fun with. And I think you articulate it really, really well in the episode. I think viewers get a lot more out of that film if they know the context behind it. If they know the other films from Fellini. And it inspired me to go watch Nights Capiria, and I adored that film. Mm-hmm. Amazing film. And I think if I watched a couple more, learned a little bit more about Fellini, went back and watched 8.5, I feel like I would get into it.
My least favorite revisit, because again, like, I don't know, I've seen all these movies. Okay, and actually I didn't say that. Playtime is my favorite of this lineup, and that is a tough decision, but I am standing by it. My favorite revisit was Once Upon a Time in the West, because that was only my second time watching it, and I'd seen it for the first time last year, and watching it again just cemented, damn, that's a great, great movie. My least favorite revisit, and maybe it was because of the context of all of these adult films, but The Sound of Music did not hit me.
I knew it.
I was like, man, should we have done something else? But then I realized, Andrew, you've seen this movie probably like in the 50s or 60s of times, because when I was a kid, we just popped in that VHS all the time. It was a 2 VHS block thing. So that movie... Yeah,
you've ringed that movie.
Yeah, so it's probably unfair to that film at this point. But then I feel like there's no way I've seen Sound of Music more than I've seen Mary Poppins, and I still love that movie. So, I think for me, it's Sound of Music was my least favorite of the decade.
And I respect that. Well, the 60s were great. I am really happy that I caught up on a lot of these films. These were list of shame films. Persona, 8.5. Mary Poppins? Mm-hmm. Where was I? What happened? I was busy watching Godzilla and Jurassic Park. All right. Thank you, as always, for joining us.
Wait.
What?
We're not going to, do any sort of...
I was going to wrap everything up. I'm throwing in the towel. This is done.
I get it, man. Do you want to know... Do you want to know, I'm feeling the burnout, too. And I think that's fair. We've been doing this for almost just under a year now. Isn't that crazy to think about?
That's really weird to think about.
We are halfway there. And so I think we deserve a break.
Okay, just a break. We don't need to stop entirely, but just a break.
First of all, I'm a little diva, and I want this to be the end of the first season. And I already talked to Arthur about this, dear listeners. So we're calling this officially the end of season 1. We're going to be not releasing content for a little while. You know what? I was going to try and come up with a time limit, but we haven't really discussed it in depth. The important thing for you to know is we're still going to be recording. We're still going to be making these episodes. But as far as Arthur having to edit them and work on his short film, and me having to market them and do all this research. A lot of effort goes into these things. And so we feel confident in creating these episodes together and releasing them in a later date. We also have gotten horribly behind in our schedule. We're recording Easy Rider now, and the Playtime episode just released yesterday. We are not the 5 weeks ahead we like to be. So we're going to take just some time off, and we're still going to be working, and we're very, very excited for you to join us for season 2. We also may or may not have a surprise episode coming your way, but a surprise is best left unspoiled. So I won't spoil it.
What are some of the exciting 1970 films that we know our listeners can look forward to?
We're going to be bringing you an episode on The Holy Mountain. We're going to be bringing you an episode of Nashville, the Robert Altman classic. Pink Flamingos, the cult film from John Waters.
Oh, yeah.
Wanda, the seminal classic from Barbara Loden. Phantom of the Paradise, a cult musical.
Oh, my.
Allegedly, Kagan will be rejoining us for that episode, but I don't want to.
Yeah, no confirmations, but yes.
I want that in the episode, though, because I want the pressure on him. I want him there for that.
All right.
So we've got some really great movies. We've got All the President's Men, and at least for me, I think we're going to both try and watch the entire trilogy of Paranoia that led up to the movie, because they're all 3 allegedly really great films. Yeah, we got some really exciting things in the future for you guys, and we're excited to sort of get a chance to recoup and restock our energy and then come out swinging with season 2. We really want to make this show as special as possible. We really appreciate you guys joining us on this journey, and we're so excited to present the second half to you once we are well rested and ready to present.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into a little bit more detail later, but it takes effort to make these episodes. It takes some time and some real work. And we want to make sure that we are going to start season 2 strong and give you some really good insight into the films of the 1970s. As always, if you are enjoying the show, we appreciate 5-star reviews. We appreciate written reviews. Thank you so much to everyone who has taken the time to help our podcast get a little bit of traction in the algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, as always, Andrew. I always look forward to this, and I will continue to look forward to our discussions and our films. Thank you, listeners. We will talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
And thank you to Nathan Royal. Cut. I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.